What happens when a billionaire CEO mocks the son of a cleaning lady, only to realize the boy speaks 12 languages and just saved his company without anyone noticing? This isn't fiction. It's a modern-day David versus Goliath, and Goliath didn't even see it coming. It started with a laugh. Not a kind laugh. Not a shared joke between friends, but a sharp, dismissive laugh that echoed through the high-ceilinged office of Veritech Solutions, bouncing off the glass walls and chrome coffee machines like a slap across the face. "You?" the man said, raising one perfectly shaped eyebrow. 12 languages? His voice was dipped in disbelief and just enough arrogance to sting, the kind of voice used to giving orders, not being questioned. The man's name was Professor Adrian Vale, 35 years old, tech visionary, AI entrepreneur, founder and CEO of Veritech, one of Chicago's fastest-growing startups. To some, he was a genius. To others, a brutal perfectionist. But today, in this moment, he was something far more dangerous: amused. And the target of his amusement? A 13-year-old boy with untied sneakers and a backpack fraying at the edges. Ethan Park didn't flinch. He stood quietly beside his mother, Maya, who clutched her cleaning supplies like armor. Her uniform was wrinkled, her name tag barely holding on. She hadn't expected this. She just wanted to drop off a job application, maybe ask for a chance at a supervisor role. But Ethan had insisted on coming with her, said he had something to show Mr. Vale. He hadn't told her what. Now she stood frozen, heart pounding, unsure if her son had just ruined her only chance at steady work. Ethan's words had been simple, softly spoken, but clearly heard. "I speak 12 languages," he had said, standing just inside the Veritech lobby. And now Professor Vale was laughing like it was the best comedy routine he'd heard in months. "Kid," Vale said, still chuckling, "you're barely out of middle school. You probably think Duolingo streaks make you fluent." There were others in the room, interns, developers, executives passing through with coffee mugs in hand. They paused, watching. A few smiled awkwardly. No one said a word. Ethan looked up at the man with the leather shoes and the $10,000 watch, and he smiled. It wasn't a confident smile. Not yet. It was the kind of smile that came before the storm. The kind that said, "You have no idea what's coming." But Professor Vale didn't see that. He saw only a janitor's kid making wild claims in his office. "Ethan," Maya whispered, her voice cracking. "Please, don't." Her eyes pleaded with him. "Let it go. Apologize. Don't make this worse. Not here. Not now." Ethan glanced at her, then looked back at Vale. He took a deep breath, one that carried years of being underestimated, years of being told he was smart for a public school kid, years of watching his mom work nights and weekends while people barely noticed her presence. He had learned something important by age 13. The world doesn't give people like him the benefit of the doubt. So, he had stopped waiting for permission. "I don't expect you to believe me," he said quietly. Professor Vale raised an eyebrow again. "Oh? So you've got proof then?" More chuckles. The developers nearby leaned in slightly. And that's when Ethan said something that made the air change. "In fact," he said, "I came here to give you a demonstration." Silence. Maya's hand flew to her chest. "Ethan!" But he had already stepped forward. "Would you like me to begin in English?" Ethan asked. "Or Mandarin? Or maybe Portuguese? I know your CTO speaks that at home." A few heads turned. Vale's eyes narrowed. This wasn't a bluff. Not anymore. In just 60 seconds, the balance in the room had shifted. The audience, once entertained by a rich man mocking a boy, was now waiting, wondering. What if he's telling the truth? What if this boy actually does speak 12 languages? And most importantly, why is he really here? That question would linger, because what no one in the room knew, not Vale, not the interns, not even Maya, was that Ethan Park wasn't just a clever kid. He had come here for a reason. And this moment was just the beginning. For a moment, no one moved. Even the always chattering espresso machine in the corner seemed to go quiet, as if it too was waiting for what the janitor's son would do next. Professor Adrian Vale leaned back in his chair, sleek, ergonomic, custom-designed. He smirked, clearly enjoying the show. "Well then," he said, gesturing with one hand like a game show host. "Go on, genius." Amaze us, the developers standing nearby didn't know whether to laugh or feel uncomfortable. Maya, standing behind her son, looked like she might collapse from tension. But Ethan didn't flinch. He reached into his backpack, the same backpack held together by safety pins and tape, and pulled out a slim black tablet. No fancy stickers, no Apple logo, just a clean screen and a quiet confidence. "Before I begin," Ethan said, his voice steady, "I'd like to ask you something." Vale blinked. He hadn't expected that. "Ask away," he said with a sarcastic flourish. Ethan tilted his head slightly. "Do you speak Korean?" Adrian chuckled. "What number? Why would I?" Ethan nodded. Without warning, he switched. In fluent, native-level Korean, Ethan said, "That's fine. I just needed to know which language to not start with." A Korean intern passing by froze, turned, stared. "Did you hear that?" he whispered to another employee. "Yeah," the other replied. "That wasn't Google Translate," Ethan continued. "Would you prefer Mandarin? Russian? Hindi? Or I could go with Arabic. That's the one you've been using in those overseas calls, right?" Vale's smirk wavered. The boy was serious, dead serious. "All right," the CEO said, his voice tightening. "Say something in Arabic then." Ethan nodded, switched effortlessly, and recited a full sentence from a classic Arabic poem. Then, in English, he translated, "He who thinks wisdom can only be found among kings has never listened to a farmer." That's when the silence broke, not with laughter this time, but with whispers. Did he just... Wait. That accent was perfect. How does a kid from Southside even know Arabic? Vale stood up now. No more lounging. He walked slowly around his desk, eyes fixed on Ethan. "Where did you learn that?" he asked. Ethan's voice didn't waver. "At the Eastwood Public Library. Every afternoon after school, a pause." "Why?" "Because I wanted to understand the world," Ethan said. "And because I knew no one would ever give someone like me the benefit of the doubt. I figured I'd stop asking and start proving the words landed like quiet bombs." Vale opened his mouth to speak, but Ethan cut him off. "I'm not done." He tapped the screen of his tablet. It blinked to life, and a list appeared. Language certificates from accredited institutions. Most were issued by online language academies, verified by video testing and proctored exams. There were 12 in total, 12 languages, each one marked with high proficiency. Reading, writing, speaking. "I've studied every day for the past 3 years," Ethan continued. 6 hours on weekdays, 10 hours on weekends. I don't have tutors, I don't have travel, just books, audiobooks, online forums, and conversation practice through international community servers. Vale narrowed his eyes. "So what?" "Anyone can memorize phrases," Ethan nodded. I agree. He reached back into his backpack and pulled out a slim, worn notebook. He flipped to a page and held it out. This, he said, is a report I wrote, in French, about your company's localization errors on your mobile app launch in Europe. Vale took the paper and scanned the lines. His face changed. The French was flawless and the analysis was brutal. Spelling errors, poor syntax, literal translations that made the app unreadable in Belgium and Switzerland. Mistakes that had cost Veritech nearly $1 million in refunded subscriptions. This is real, Vale muttered. I know, Ethan replied. I submitted it anonymously 6 months ago. But no one responded. No one breathed. Not the interns. Not Maya. Not even Vale. He looked up slowly. Why are you really here, Ethan? The boy exhaled. Because I don't want my mom cleaning floors for people who think she's invisible. Then, after a pause, and because your company's making global communication tools while being blind to the languages that actually connect people. Professor Adrian Vale was no longer smiling. He wasn't leaning back in his chair, or making snide remarks, or asking rhetorical questions. He was standing still, silent, and for the first time in a very long time, uncertain. He looked again at the report Ethan had handed him. The French was flawless. The insights were sharp. The analysis exposed glaring flaws in Veritech's European expansion strategy, flaws no one on his international team had dared to point out. Who wrote this for you? He asked finally, his voice quieter. I did, Ethan said simply. That's not possible. I've got more if you want, Ethan replied. But maybe this would be faster. He tapped his tablet again. The screen blinked, and a video call began to ring. Vale narrowed his eyes. What is this? You'll see. The call connected. A woman in her late 40s appeared on the screen. Behind her were bookshelves stacked with dictionaries, research journals, and academic plaques. She wore glasses, a calm smile, and spoke with a gentle accent. Dr. Ko? Ethan said in flawless Mandarin. Ethan, the woman replied, her face lighting up. Are you ready for your next oral exam? Actually, Ethan said, still in Mandarin, my potential employer has some doubts about my fluency. Dr. Ko chuckled and nodded. Then, without switching to English, she launched into a complex series of questions, idiomatic expressions, cultural references, and advanced grammar exercises. Ethan didn't blink. He responded in perfect tone, pace, and structure. The exchange lasted 2 full minutes. No hesitation, no stumbles. The office fell into stunned silence. No one understood a word. But they all knew what they were hearing. This wasn't a kid who had memorized lines. This was fluency. Dr. Ko, Ethan said finally, switching to English. Could you tell Mr. Vale who you are? Certainly, she smiled. I'm the head of the Applied Linguistics program at the Global Language Institute of Seoul. I've been teaching Mandarin for 22 years. Ethan is extraordinary. Vale swallowed. He's mastered a full 2-year university-level course in less than 10 months. And not just in Mandarin, his French and Korean are near native. Thank you, Professor, Ethan said politely, ending the call. The tablet screen faded to black. Stillness. Then, that's a trick, someone whispered near the back. Ethan turned to face the voice. If you want more proof, I have recordings from my live translation sessions. Or we can call my instructors from Brazil, Tokyo, or Frankfurt. But I'm hoping we don't have to go that far. Vale stared at the tablet as though it were radioactive. His company specialized in natural language processing machine translation, AI-powered communication tools, and real-time speech recognition. And yet, None of his top engineers could hold a conversation like that. He finally looked up. "What do you want from me?" he asked. Ethan stepped forward. "My mom works here. She's been cleaning your floors and emptying your trash for 2 years." "No one's ever learned her name," Vale said nothing. "She's invisible to you. And that's fine. She doesn't ask for much. But I'm not invisible. Not anymore." Ethan placed another document on the desk. "Shakutuya, this is a proposal I wrote, just using your company's publicly available data and financial reports. I identified language-based losses across 3 continents. Small translation errors, poor localization strategy, tone-deaf marketing. It's costing you millions." Vale picked it up. It was 17 pages long. Diagrams, charts, annotations, detailed, clear, brutally honest. "If you'd let me consult, even part-time, I could fix those issues. And I won't charge more than what you pay your junior developers?" Maya gasped softly. Ethan wasn't asking for charity. He was offering value, real value. "And her?" Vale asked, nodding at Maya. "She deserves more too," Ethan said. "Not just better pay. But respect." The CEO's jaw tightened. He'd built Veritech from his college dorm. He'd fought through doubt, failure, funding rejections. He believed he could spot talent. But somehow, he had missed this, because it came wearing faded sneakers. Professor Adrian Vale sat down, not in defeat, at least not yet, but in confusion, in calculation. He stared at the 17-page proposal Ethan had laid on the desk, flipping through pages like he was searching for a catch. Some sign this was plagiarized, fabricated, impossible. But everything added up. The style was consistent. The analysis was sharp. The numbers aligned with what their internal analysts had only recently begun to uncover. This kid had beaten them to it. "Why would you go through all this trouble?" Vale asked finally, still trying to regain control of the conversation. "You don't even work here." Ethan didn't hesitate. "Because I already do." Vale looked up. "I mean unofficially," Ethan clarified. "For the last 3 months, I've been studying your company's communication systems, press releases, app updates, translated user guides, internal memos." "How?" Vale asked, narrowing his eyes. "My mom takes home shredded documents sometimes. I piece them back together." Maya looked horrified. "Vale?" He looked stunned. "I also listen," Ethan added. "Your office isn't exactly soundproof, especially when you're on conference calls in Arabic with your Middle East partners." That hit a nerve. The room went very still. "I overheard your call with the Dubai firm last month," Ethan said. "You used mustajil when you should have said istithnai. You didn't notice, but they did." Vale blinked. That mistake changed the tone of urgency into a request for special treatment. "It's a subtle difference," Ethan continued. "But they didn't like it. You lost their trust. You almost lost the contract." Vale leaned back. That call had gone cold. He'd blamed the connection. Or maybe they were stalling. But now it made sense. "Why didn't you say anything?" Vale asked, his voice lower. "Because I knew you wouldn't listen," Ethan replied. "At least not until you had no choice." He stepped closer. "I didn't just study your company for fun. I studied it because I wanted to understand how people like you think. How you see people like me. Like my mom." Vale glanced at Maya, who stood silent, clutching the handle of her cleaning cart as if it were the only solid thing in the room. "You think success comes from polish," Ethan said. "From pedigree, from private schools and perfect accents." He took a breath. But real intelligence doesn't come from access. It comes from effort. From hunger, the words landed like a punch. In this moment, Ethan was no longer just a bright kid. He was a mirror. A mirror that forced Adrian Vale to see something he didn't want to. How easily he dismissed potential that didn't look like his own reflection. And Ethan wasn't done. He pulled out one final document from his backpack. "This," he said, placing it gently on the desk, "is a plan to restructure Veritech's entire multilingual communications division. It doesn't just solve the current problems. It expands your global market by 23%, based on your own user data from the last quarter." Vale opened it. Inside were charts, strategy maps, a breakdown of pain points by region, proposed hires, platform enhancements. It was better than anything his senior team had pitched at the past year. "You want a job?" Vale asked. Ethan shook his head. "I want a position. A title." A voice. Vale tilted his head. "Junior consultant," Ethan said. "Languages and culture. Part-time, remote flexible. And I want my mom promoted facility supervisor." With full benefits and salary, Vale looked at the boy. "Is that all?" Ethan paused. "No," he said quietly. "I also want a scholarship program for kids like me, who don't have your opportunities, but have the brains and the drive." He locked eyes with Vale. "And I want your name on it." Silence. Everyone was watching, waiting. Vale stood slowly, picked up the proposal, and nodded. "This is blackmail," he muttered. "No," Ethan said, his voice steady. "This is a second chance." There was a long pause in the room, the kind of silence that stretches time, where people hold their breath and stare, trying to process what just happened. A 13-year-old boy had just handed the CEO of a multi-million-dollar tech company a contract, a proposal, and a demand list. And he wasn't finished. Ethan reached into his backpack one more time. "What now?" Vale asked, half exasperated, half nervous. "This," Ethan said, pulling out a small black recorder, "is my insurance." He clicked a button, and suddenly, the room was filled with a familiar voice. Adrian Vale's voice, recorded clearly, unmistakably. "Look, they can code, but they can't lead. That's why I don't put those kids in key positions. It's always drama with them poor backgrounds, chip on their shoulder. I need people who reflect our brand." The words cut like knives. One of the interns gasped. Another looked away. Maya dropped her hand from her chest. Her expression shifted, not to shock, but confirmation. She had always suspected this was how they saw her. Vale turned pale. Where did you get that?" he asked. "You said it last week." "In the elevator. I was standing behind the mail cart." "You didn't see me." Vale's face went from pale to crimson. "That was a private conversation. New York, California, and Illinois are all one-party consent states," Ethan said calmly. "Legally, I only need my permission to record." "You planned this," Vale said slowly, voice tight. "Of course I did," Ethan replied. "You thought I walked in here by accident?" The calm in his voice wasn't arrogance. It was precision. Every move Ethan made was calculated, timed for maximum impact. "You've spent your career building a brand," Ethan continued. "I've spent the last 3 months studying it. The image, the PR, the values page on your website." He took another step forward. That recording doesn't match your brand. And if it leaks, your company loses more than just a few contracts." Vale ran a hand through his hair. His world, his carefully curated empire, was suddenly standing on a fault line. "You're blackmailing me," he whispered again. No, Ethan replied. I'm giving you a choice. He placed the contract gently on the desk, beside the proposal and the scholarship program draft. Sign this. Make the changes. Live up to the mission statement you pretend to believe in. Or, the recording goes public. Vale glanced at the clock. The room felt hot, the walls too close. And what if I sign and you release it anyway? He asked. Because unlike you, Ethan said, voice clear, unwavering, I believe in second chances. Vale blinked. I don't want to ruin you, Ethan added. I want to change the way you think, the way your company works. He handed over a pen. Solid, black, no gold, no ego, just business. Maya, who had stood silent the entire time, finally spoke. Ethan, are you sure? Her voice was soft, but steady. He turned to her, nodded. We don't need revenge, he said. We need respect. Vale stared at the documents, then at Ethan, then at Maya. In those moments, everything shifted. Because what Vale saw wasn't just a smart kid or a desperate mother. He saw a standard. He picked up the pen. His hand trembled as he signed. One by one, contract, promotion, scholarship fund, each signature felt heavier than the last. When he was done, he exhaled. The room stayed silent. Until Ethan picked up the recorder and said, This recording and everything that happened here today stays locked. As long as change actually happens. He dropped the recorder back into his bag, and for the first time since the meeting began, Adrian Vale smiled. Not the smug smile of a man in power, but the reluctant, stunned smile of someone who had just been outplayed and respected it. 6 months later. The Veritech headquarters looked different, not in architecture. The glass walls were still there. The espresso machine still hissed. The same startup art, the same potted plants. But something had changed. Someone had changed. Professor Adrian Vale stood at the front of a long glass table inside the company's new Innovation and Access division. Behind him hung a large display screen showing the names and photos of the first 25 recipients of the Park Future Scholars Program. Below those names, a small logo, inspired by Ethan Park. Vale cleared his throat. He wasn't used to this. Giving speeches, especially ones where he wasn't the smartest person in the room. Sitting across from him were teens 13 to 17 years old, who had all come from neighborhoods like Ethan's, families like Maya's. But they were there now, inside Veritech's most advanced R&D space, attending the company's first equity-focused language technology boot camp. At the far end of the table, Ethan sat quietly, reviewing an international contract in German. He was now officially Veritech's youngest ever language consultant, and he had earned every syllable of that title. Gracefully dressed in a charcoal gray blazer and company ID badge, Maya Park entered the room holding a small box of catered lunches. Except this time, she wasn't here to serve. She was facility supervisor, now managing a staff of 12, training new hires and coordinating interdepartmental access. When she entered, everyone looked up. Vale turned to her with respect in his eyes. Miss Park, he said with a smile, would you do us the honor? She looked over at Ethan. He gave a subtle nod. Maya turned to the group. When my son walked into this building that day, I thought he was going to cost me my job, she began. The room chuckled softly. But instead, she continued, he gave all of us a new beginning. Not just my family, this company. Every single one of you here. There was a beat of silence. Then she looked at Vale. And I want to thank someone else too. Vale seemed surprised. You saw your mistake, Maya said gently. and you chose to fix it. That's rare and brave. The room went quiet. Vale nodded once. Ethan looked up from his contract and stood. He walked to the front of the room. "Someone asked me last week," he began, "if I was scared that day. Coming in here." Saying all those things, he paused. I was terrified. A few people blinked, surprised. "But my mom taught me something," Ethan said. "The only thing scarier than speaking truth to power is staying silent when you know you shouldn't." He glanced around the room. There are kids out there right now just like me, who know things, who see things, who can fix things, but they never get asked, never get noticed. He held up a small card, his new company badge. "I wear this not because of luck, but because I prepared. I worked, I paid attention, and I stopped asking permission to matter." The room fell into a thoughtful silence. Then Vale stood. He walked over to Ethan and extended his hand. They shook. "I was wrong," Vale said, "about who matters, about where genius comes from. You taught me that." Ethan smiled. "You listened." "That's more than most." From the back, a girl raised her hand, one of the scholars. "Mr. Park, do you think we can do what you did?" Ethan looked around. "You won't have to," he said, "because now you'll have a seat at the table." And just like that, the story was no longer about a janitor's son. It was about a system corrected, a future reimagined, and a company transformed not by a scandal, but by a boy who refused to stay invisible. He walked in wearing hand-me-down sneakers and walked out rewriting the rules of who gets to be heard. He didn't raise his voice. He raised the standard. Because sometimes the smartest person in the room isn't wearing a suit. Sometimes he's holding a mop outside the door. If this story made you smile, cry, or clench your fists, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Talk about it. Let it remind the world that dignity, talent, and truth don't need permission to speak. This wasn't just about a promotion. It was about proving one thing. Genius doesn't wear a uniform.